Hey everyone, this is Derek Bros with the Conscious Resistance Network, and today we're going to talk about the Border Patrol. Before we get into that, I want to remind you guys to bookmark theconsciousresistance.com right here, where you can get all of our latest content, including new content from Regan Keeley and from myself and from some of our other contributors. You can also get discounted tickets to Anarchapulco coming up next month, and of course you can go right here and subscribe to our email newsletter, which I send out every week, typically on the weekends, and get all of our content straight to your inbox. All right, so the focus of today's episode is simply this, my friends. And I've done a video on this before, I'll show you in a moment, but let me just try to collect all my thoughts together. And what I'm going to do in the next couple of moments, I'm going to try to keep this video brief, because I can ramble on about this topic for a bit, but I want to key in on the most important areas. So I'm going to tell you what my claims are. I'm going to back those claims up with evidence. And then I'm going to put a question to you guys that I want you to think about and really to reflect on. And then I would like for your comments below. That's the most effective way I can think about this. And I also want to address something that I try to focus on solutions in my content, and obviously people like Regan do as well. And we talk about agorism and self-healing and personal empowerment. And that's absolutely vital. And it's definitely an important half of the equation. The other half of the equation involves waking up to what's going on in our physical world and how we're being led astray, how we are being put in chains mentally, physically, spiritually, etc. And how are there people, they are individuals, not just kind of amorphous, blob-like entities like, oh, the government or simply the state. Obviously, these concepts, are real and exist. But there are names and faces, individuals behind these institutions who can be held accountable and who can be made aware of the crimes that they have put us through. And that's important, right? So that is why I focus on some of these quote-unquote negative things. And also because if you've seen my videos in the past few months, you understand that I don't have much faith or hope for the direction the United States is going on, specifically towards the end of this year and going into 2020 and beyond. So I'm going to speak with a bit of urgency in all of my videos going forth that are specifically video reports, so please do be aware of that. So let's get to my points, then the evidence, and then the questions. This is from the American Civil Liberties Union from December 5th, 2018. President Trump is accelerating the militarization of the southwest border. And it just talks about how the border between the U.S. and Mexico has been increasingly militarized since 9/11. And of course, this didn't start with Donald Trump. I know Trump supporters. It started actually with George Bush and then expanded under Obama. And then, yes, expanding further under Trump, because that is the name of the game. Nothing is stopping. You can say that there are these pieces of the puzzle that Trump has fixed, or, oh, he ended the individual mandate, or, just like the Obama supporters, they saw some good things about Obama, but they ignored the overall negative trends, and the same thing with the Bush supporters, and the same thing with the Trump supporters, apparently. The creation of the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11 accelerated the government's operations on the U.S.-Mexico border. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection, a division of the Department of Homeland Security, grew in size and scope under Bush and Obama, gaining additional powers and hiring thousands of new personnel, despite a shocking pattern of serious misconduct among its officers, including child abuse, sexual assault, cruelty, and murder. The number of Border Patrol agents has doubled between 2000 and 2011, and by the year President Trump took office, Border Patrol reported just under 20,000 Border Patrol agents nationwide. The rise in Border Patrol agents, however, does not include thousands of other Border Patrol officers on the border or personnel from other federal, state, and local agencies deployed to the border. So in short, there's a small growing army amassing across the U.S. border, and we'll get to the arguments that this is legitimate, in the name of fighting illegal immigration. Because just like before this, we were told we must give up our rights, we must be allowed to be searched, we must allow invasions of privacy to stop the terrorists. The focus has shifted. Yes, they still use terrorism when they need to keep you in line, but for the most part these days, or at least for one segment of the population, the fear is the immigrants, the illegal immigrants, the brown people, the Muslims, ISIS, or just they're going to take your jobs, all these different things, right? I'm not saying any of those arguments aren't legitimate or don't have any merit to any degree. I'm simply saying that is the fear that is being felt by certain individuals, and that is the fear that is being played upon by the powers behind the scenes. Obviously, Trump is just a figurehead and just the latest puppet. So shortly after Trump's inauguration, he called for hiring an additional 7,500 border agents and 10,000 immigrations and custom officers despite a concern over a lack of safeguards in hiring procedures and past corruption. So on top of that, Trump joined Bush and Obama in authorizing the deployment of National Guard troops to the border. Yes, both of them did it before, sending some 4,000 National Guard troops in 2018, saying that, there's this crisis going on. So the goal here, the point of this piece and of the others I'm about to show you, is that Border Patrol has been growing and growing in authority. I live down here in Houston, okay? I'm about 12 hours from the border, but even here, technically, anyone who is within 100 miles of the border, and that's not just the southern border, that's all around the United States, East Coast, North, West Coast, down south, they believe that there's a 100-mile Constitution-free zone. And it used to be 50 miles. Now it's 100 miles. Border Patrol officials also regularly act like the Constitution does not apply in border areas, operating lawlessly and frequently discarding the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures in its 100-mile border zone. 100-mile border zone. Think about that. Like, what other agency in the history of government has been able to do that, other than, say, the Stasi, the Nazis, and other, I'm not trying to just jump to the extreme, but every totalitarian nation has given their soldiers the ability, or their officers the ability, just to go into your house, or just to go in to search anything, and they're claiming lay to this whole area. Now, as far as the border wall goes, and I'll get into again the arguments that this is all being done to stop criminals and immigrants, or that the Soros and the New World Order are trying to flood illegals in order to create order out of chaos, which I do think is partially true. The border wall itself, if Trump was to get it, if you've seen the bills that have actually been pushed forth by the Trump administration, I've written about this now for a couple of years, they call for having armed guards towers like every few hundred feet, having facial recognition cameras and license plate readers all up and down the border, just a completely surveillance police state grid along the border to enter and exit, right? So that's what they want to put there. And it's not just to keep people out, it's obviously to keep people in. And that's what worries me more and more, is that they're using this fear. And as I said, the Soros of the world and the powers that be behind the scenes, they do want to try to create havoc between different populations and different groups of people. So they use the United States military policy to go down to the United States and to interfere and intervene and elections down in Guatemala and Honduras and Central and Latin America, and create dictators down there that can just destroy indigenous populations and create chaos in those countries. And then the blowback of that is the people start leaving, trying to look for something better. And of course, these shadow government deep state agents behind the scenes, they help funnel them along and bring them up to the United States, and yes, try to create order out of chaos by then getting the Republicans to react and say, oh, look, there's this crisis, right? And the other side, just, everybody's playing a role. It's scripted right in front of you, right? But they're doing it for a purpose, to militarize the border. That is what we're headed towards. And right now, the Democrats are acting like they're against this type of thing. But ultimately, just like with everything, both sides will come together in order to enslave the people. Now let's look at a couple more Border Patrol agents issues here. Epic, the Electronic Privacy Information Center, recently posted, Border Agency finalizes social media collection rule. Despite comments from Epic and others, the Customs and Border Protection will collect social media information from Americans and place that data outside legal protections provided by the Privacy Act. Epic opposed the collection of personal data and said that the Border Patrol should narrow the Privacy Act exemptions. The agency responded to public comments, failing to defend the agency's decision. In a related FOIA lawsuit against DHS, Epic obtained documents which reveal that federal agencies gather social media comments to identify individuals critical of the government. So this Border Patrol agency that we're just talking about, that has a 100-mile Constitution-free zone, which is searching people and just, anything they say pretty much goes along the border, also is monitoring people's social media to see who is critical of the government, so that when they come there, they can probably set them aside for extra search. Then we got this one here. Border Patrol and the TSA allowed to secretly spy on everyone's social media accounts. According to the DHS report published last month, nothing can stop the Border Patrol or the TSA from secretly spying on everyone's social media accounts. This is just looking at further what I just said. To recap, DHS claims they need to spy on everyone's Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Ozone, Weibo, Twitter, Reddit, Pinterest, Ask, Tumblr, Flickr, Google+, LinkedIn, VK, some other ones, Meetup accounts, to find out their political views and more. For a complete list of 60-plus social media accounts DHS spies on, click there. Look at that. They're spying on your social media, right? And if you come to the border, that could be a problem for you. That's the world we're headed to. And you guys who are out there falling for the fear of immigrants are calling for more democratic or more totalitarian control of the border in order to be used against the immigrants, and you don't realize this is going to be used against every single one of us until eventually you can't leave the United States. This is from The Intercept. Newly released FOIA documents shed light on Border Patrol's seemingly limitless authority. This is just from about a little more than a week ago. When a Border Patrol agent is contemplating pulling someone over, they have a checklist of possible behaviors to look out for. They can determine whether the vehicle or its load looks unusual in some way, or whether the passengers appear dirty. If those descriptions don't apply, they can assess, quote, whether the person inside the vehicle avoid looking at the agent, or whether the persons inside the vehicle are paying undue attention to the agent's presence. And if those don't apply, they can simply determine that the car is in an area nearby the border and it pulled it over on that basis alone. So basically, these details and more have been revealed in 1,000 pages of previously unseen Border Patrol training documents, which were obtained by the ACLU after a 4-year-long battle and shared exclusively with The Intercept. The documents finally released to the ACLU's Border Litigation Project in August in response to a 2014 Freedom of Information Act request focused on the policies of Border Patrol's roving patrols, units that operate outside of the ports of entry and checkpoints, often venturing far into the country's interior. So now they're not just having guys at the border stopping your car when you try to come across from, Mexico or into the U.S. And also, again, if you live down here, you don't even have to cross the country. If you're driving to El Paso in West Texas, you will hit checkpoints, illegal checkpoints where they can just stop you and search you if they want. But they also have these roving patrols. These roving patrols can question, detain, or arrest individuals they suspect of having illegally crossed the border or having smuggled drugs or other contraband into the country. And you can see the whole documents right here for those who want to actually read them themselves. Don't just trust me. The documents include a copy of the agency's 2012 Enforcement Law Course, which the Border Patrol described in court filings as advice on the, quote, legal authority of Border Patrol's law enforcement personnel and issues they would confront in investigations and prosecutions. So there are a bunch of PowerPoint presentations, and I'll just tell you a few of the details. I do advise you to read this whole article, but it just shows you how arbitrary their process is, that they can pretty much come up with any reason they want to stop you. Here's a list of the reasons that they can pull you over if you're within 100 miles of the border. Are you ready for this? 21 possible articulable facts that can serve as a basis for stopping a car. Whether the vehicle is close to the border, whether the vehicle is on a known smuggling route, whether the vehicle's presence is inconsistent with the local traffic patterns, whether the vehicle could have been trying to avoid a checkpoint, whether the vehicle appears to be heavily laden, whether the vehicle is from out of the area, whether the vehicle or its load looks unusual in some way, whether the vehicle is of a sort often favored by smugglers, whether the vehicle appears to have been altered or modified, whether the cargo area in the vehicle is covered in time or at night, of day or at night, which the vehicle is spotted, and whether it corresponds to a shift change, whether the vehicle is being driven in an erratic or unsafe manner, whether the vehicle appears to be traveling in tandem with another vehicle, whether the vehicle looks as if it has recently been driven off-road, whether the persons inside the vehicle avoid looking at the agents, whether the persons inside are paying undue attention to the agent's presence, whether the persons in the vehicle try to avoid being seen or exhibit unusual behavior, whether the driver slowed down after seeing the agent, the passengers appear dirty, there is intelligence available that suggests the smuggling will occur in the area by a specific vehicle, or whether the vehicle is coming from an area of a sensor alert. Now, all of those are just so wide that nearly anything you're doing could be interpreted as a reason to be stopped by the Border Patrol. And again, the Border Patrol claims that a 1953 Justice Department regulation extends its jurisdiction to within 100 miles of the border, which covers 9 of the country's 10 largest cities and 2/3 of its population. This document that they got also provides a legal framework for a 25-mile zone around the border where Border Patrol agents believe they are allowed to patrol private lands and question anyone they encounter, including within border-adjacent cities like New York, Miami, and San Diego. According to these documents, Border Patrol agents are not allowed to enter private dwellings or infringe upon an individual's reasonable expectation of privacy. When a citizen believes they're not putting something in the public view, and a law enforcement agency would be required to obtain a warrant to conduct a search. What's less clear is how the agency's near constant surveillance of the area surrounding the border serves to narrow this reasonable expectation of privacy. And then the entire chapter on electronic surveillance has been redacted. So it's pretty disturbing though, but they talk about air surveillance and GPS surveillance, and I mean, I really recommend you reading this whole thing, but think about that. I mean, you can see this right here. This is, your suspicion rises, so does your authority to search and seizure. So you start here as a consensual encounter, right? The other person's in control. They say consent search, an inventory search, a routine search, and then things get elevated. Border detention and search, investigation, detention, frisk, search for weapons only, protective sweep, search for hidden threats, non-routine, search incident to arrest, strip search of person. So just their whole process for how they go through taking away your rights and bit by bit. Very, very much worth your time. But these guys not only believe that they have a 100-mile constitution-free zone within the border, but then a 25-mile zone that they can just come on and view on your lands, spy on your lands. They can't come into your houses yet, but they're getting pretty close. Now, what other piece of evidence do I have? Facial recognition cameras may bring exit checks to U.S.-Mexico border. This was back in November 2018. And this is, again, about the growing threat of facial recognition technology, excuse me, that I've been telling you guys about for quite some time. And since this report came out, we now have the TSA's roadmap, where the TSA themselves has said that in order to fly by the end of this year, going into 2020, you are going to have some form of facial recognition biometric process. So retina scan, thumbprint or fingerprint scan, or a face scan in order to fly domestically, not just internationally, but everywhere. Everywhere. Do you get it? Do you guys understand what's taking place here? They're being given powers, unlimited powers to fight immigration now and terrorism. And just if you needed any more reason, Washington trains Guatemala's mass murderers, and the Border Patrol played a role. This is coming from The Nation. Now, 2 Guatemalan children have died under Border Patrol custody, but the agency's role in Latin American oppression has a long history. So this talks about how back in the 40s and 50s, when the Border Patrol was working near the Mexican border, and just this involving the FBI, I mean, you gotta read this. It's pretty disturbing, but just usual CIA involvement, Border Patrol involvement, government involvement in other nations, oppressing of indigenous people, oppressing of the third world, and nothing new we really haven't seen before. One final one here. Greyhound is still failing to protect customers from Border Patrol abuse back in September 2018. And this is just showing how Border Patrol gets onto Greyhound buses and interrogates and searches anybody they want if they're anywhere near the border, and this continues. And obviously it's easy to say this could be racial profiling because they're going to be looking for anybody who's brown. But also I've been with friends who are, white as a ghost, and they've also been messed with. So this is just going to affect everybody if you don't do anything about it, and if you just keep calling for your own enslavement, because you're allowing your fear to control you. You're allowing your fear to control you and to fall prey to this argument that in order to stop illegal immigrants, in order to stop this flow of people who have a different culture or who are being used by the New World Order, the deep state, to create order out of chaos, we must clamp down and tighten our borders and build a military along there. You don't see how that's going to serve the goals of the people who are already in control. And if you don't see that, it's also likely that you think that Trump is probably is a good guy or something. And that's what I've noticed, is people who still are trying to defend Trump think that the border thing is good because, yes, they've seen some violence in Europe and places like Germany and Sweden and others, and say, look, the immigrants have taken over, there's no-go zones. Like, I think these are all real issues. I'm not trying to say that immigration is not an issue. I've talked about this before. In fact, I've actually talked about this. Border checkpoints are an invasion of liberty when I was on tour earlier this year and showed you guys how we had just gone through one of these border checkpoints and how it actually affects you in the real world. I've also talked about this before in a video called The Fight Against Immigration Welcomes the Police State back in July of last year. And it's essentially the same message, but a little bit shorter. And I've written about this in my book about borders and immigration and how we could have a world where there are still what we call private property borders, but decentralized borders without state governments in control, without central governments in control, whether that's the United Nations or the U.S. government, and still have freedom and still have freedom of movement and still have diversity and allow people to live with who they want and not with who they don't want to, right? And I've also talked about this in this video called A Panarchist Take on Borders. But my whole point here is that, yes, there are people who are trying to manipulate you and create fear in the world. They are trying to bring populations and mix populations together to create chaos, because maybe there are some people who just don't get along at this point. Maybe there are cultures who are not compatible at the current moment in human history, right? And there are those who manipulate behind the scenes, what many have come to call the deep state or the shadow government, right? Whatever you want to call them, the parasite class. And they're willing to use anything. So they do problem, reaction, solution. The problem is people see immigrant populations coming in, and some people are like, oh, they're changing, they're wiping out all the white people. I don't know if there's truth to that, right? But you can say, well, the domestic population is being displaced, right? These are the arguments, right? Or they're taking our jobs, or they're bringing in criminals, these different things, right? So that's the problem. The reaction to that is some people get extremely nationalistic, extremely jingoistic and they cling to what they know. Only my skin color, only my countrymen, only this, right? Screw the other people, no diversity, no, more than one culture. We just need a homogenous population and that'll fix everything, right? And so they close down emotionally, spiritually, and physically, and they want to build walls and borders and build those around them. So that's the reaction. And the solution is being provided, and that is, well, we need stricter controls along the border. We need to give Border Patrol more control. We need them to have more weapons and more tools and more militarization, along with the FBI and all the local police and everybody else that's out there already being militarized. That is what's taking place right now. Your fear is leading you astray. Your fear is enslaving you, my friends. And this happens time and time again. Once more, for those in the back who might be hard-headed, I'm not saying that there aren't real questions or problems to discuss and to work through as it relates to immigration. But if you think the people in control, the people who are playing the figureheads like Trump and others actually give a damn about you and are doing you any good without serving their own ends, then you're not paying attention, my friend. This game runs deep, and they've been planning for a long time. And the final point here before I let you go, this is not about feeling hopeless, because I notice some of you say, oh, this guy's just giving up hope. He doesn't believe in any good. No, I believe in plenty of good, but I don't see that good coming from the top. I see that good coming from you and from me, from us regular folk who are just trying to live and survive in this crazy world, not those who want to use their psychopathy and their sociopathic tendencies to manipulate the good in the rest of us to bend the world to their will. That is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with sick, twisted people who are a part of us. These are our brothers and our sisters, but they're sick and they're twisted, and they are trying to control each of us and use any sort of divisive tactic they can. Class, identity, race, ethnicity, and yes, even nation. These are all ways to divide. I'm not saying you can't be proud of where you're born and the imaginary lines on the map or the natural borders of the earth, but at the end of the day, we're all human beings. And until we recognize that, and we recognize that the people behind the scenes, they're willing to put aside their differences so they can enact their larger plan, which is world domination and complete control of the mind, the spirit, and the body. So those of us who oppose that and who are trying to create light in this world, we need to put aside our petty differences, come together, see past the fear, and rise above to meet the challenge. Otherwise, we're all fucked. Thank you guys for listening. My name is Derek Bros. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.